97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
I think our track record in the last 20 years, how many NFC East titles, playoff appearances, and appearances in the NFC Championship game, those are some of the metrics I look at, and I'll compare our record with almost anybody.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, which you can listen to Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays at 6 a.m. And it is brought to you locally by Dr. Lyle M. Back. From everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery, go to ilovelyle.back.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4. Geoff Mosher's in the house today for Football at 4. And, Geoff, we saw your tweet just a couple of minutes ago. The Eagles will have something for 2 consecutive years that they haven't had in about 5 years when they return to the practice field this year. So a little continuity at the wide receiver coach position.
Yeah, I mean, when you stop to think about it, the fact that the Eagles haven't had the same wide receivers coach for 2 straight years since Bobby Bicknell, on Chip Kelly's staff, and he was there for 3 years, from 2013 to 2015. And then after that, just a new coach every single year. That, to me, tells you a lot about the issues that the team has had at wide receiver development. Clearly, I think continuity isn't a good thing if you don't have the right guy. But Aaron Moorehead was just hired last year. He had experience as an NFL player and a college coach. And so I feel like you have to give this guy the opportunity to prove that he's either a good or a not good coach. I don't think last year was any indication that he was one or the other.
Yeah, I know people – I feel like as we get older and it's almost as we get more information, it's like sports in general, Moshe, like the more information, we get more information. Before it was like the head coach, and then it was like the coordinators. Now we're finding out how important these position coaches really are, right? I mean, it's like – you never really thought about them much 10, 15 years ago.
We talk about it on Inside the Birds a lot. If you look at Andy Reid's first staff, and I know Andy has talked about it, Joe Banner has discussed it, Jeffrey Lurie and Howie have talked about all of those position coaches and how good they were, whether it was Juan Castillo or Sean McDermott or Steve Spagnuolo or Brad Childress. I mean, a lot of the guys that Andy had in his early years who were position coaches work their way up and to become pretty good coaches and then coordinators elsewhere and head coaches elsewhere, as we talk about the Andy Reid coaching tree. So I think a good staff of coaches is very important. And I also think that when you're a new coach like Nick Sirianni, you do need to examine the coaches who are in-house already and gather as much info before you just quickly make a decision not to bring him back. I mean, Andy Reid himself, as we just talked about, he was not the first guy to hire Juan Castillo in Philly. Juan Castillo was part of Ray Rhodes' coaching staff. So was John Harbaugh, for that matter. And there was even a third guy from that staff. Oh, Ted Williams, the running backs coach, who was Andy's running backs coach here for a while, were all all brought over from the previous regime. So it's not the worst thing in the world to keep on some coaches from a prior regime on your staff if you think they're competent.
Since we're on the topic of wide receivers, I'll stay on that as the focus. But how much of a role do you think Nick Sirianni will have in the wide receiver room, considering his background at that position? Or do you think as the head coach, there's just so much on the table that maybe he's not in the wide receiver room as much?
No, I think it will matter that's his pedigree. I think he's always going to have an eye just naturally on that position and how the coach of that position, in this case Aaron Moorehead, is doing with that talent, because that's an area that he specialized in. Just like, Doug Peterson being a quarterback, and yes, he had Frank Reich and John DeFilippo, guys who played the quarterback position, but whenever we talked about it as that three-headed cocoon, really, that quarterback cocoon that Wentz and Foles had early on. So I do think in this case it's all a little bit similar, because I believe Kevin Patullo, who's going to be the pass game specialist, has also played wide receiver earlier when he was in either high school or college, I forget. But so he has that in his pedigree too. So now you've got Aaron Moorehead, you've got Nick Sirianni and Kevin Patullo, all with kind of a receiver pedigree. And that, to me, is a good thing if your name is Jalen Reagor or Travis Fulgham or Greg Ward or any of the guys who are young, Hightower and Quez Watkins.
Talking with Geoff Mosher, and, of course, Aaron Moorehead is the wide receiver coach. He's back, and some people might be like, ho-hum, big deal. But he's got an interesting group to work with here, too. And you mentioned the continuity, but how many young guys they have. And one question I have for you, Moshe, is that an area where they can target this offseason to upgrade, or is it we got to stick with what we got? We got all these young guys in here, Hightower, Watkins, Reagor, Arcega-Whiteside. Can they add to this group, or is this what you're looking at?
Well, I believe they certainly can add to the group, Mike. I mean, you're going to lose Alshon. You're going to lose Deshaun. You don't have a whole lot of veterans. I don't know what's going to happen with Marquise Goodwin, if he's going to come back or not. So really, if you look at who's likely to be on the team, you're talking about a second-year receiver in Jalen Reagor. You're talking about Travis Fulgham, who technically I guess will be his third year, but he just really got his feet wet last year as a player in the league. Greg Ward, same thing, really just last year was his first full year as a starter. And then that's your top three. I don't know what's going to become of J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Some people think that the new coaching staff will be able to tap into him. I'm of the mindset that, he'll probably be released going into the year because he's not going to win out a competition. When I already mentioned three receivers and I have not yet even gotten to Hightower and Quez Watkins, that probably puts J-Jaw fighting for a fifth or a sixth spot, and he's not really a special teamer. So we'll have to see what happens there. But they're very young, Mike, to your point. I think it would be smart to do one of two things. One, bring in a veteran if you can. I know the Eagles won't have a lot of money, but maybe there's a veteran wide receiver who won't cost a whole lot of money. And two, nobody's saying you can't upgrade this spot because really, other than Reagor as a first-rounder, there's really no quote-unquote proven talent. Greg Ward's a nice possession receiver, but he doesn't have to be a top 2 or 3 receiver for you. So if you're in the draft and wide receiver is there, whatever round you're picking in as your top guy on the board, there's no shame in taking a wide receiver.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people want that. And let me ask you, though, where do you stand on if you took a wide receiver at pick number 6? I mean, I know there's those 3, Chase and Weddle and Smith at the top of this class. That if you ended up with them, that's going to make the fans happy. But do you like going that direction?
I mean, it obviously depends on how the board shakes out, but I would not be disappointed if they took one of those guys because they're all kind of considered top 5, top 10 talent. So I would have to think that they're rated similarly on the Eagles board. Waddle is as you brought up, really good receiver who got hurt this year, but a lot of people felt that he was as good, if not better. Him and Devontae Smith were as good, if not better, than Ruggs and Jeudy. When I did the scouting process last year, a lot of people said, Ruggs and Jeudy are great. They're going to go high in the draft, but Alabama actually has 2 better receivers in Smith and Waddle. So, and then of course, Jamar Chase, we know what he can do too. And if you're telling me that one of those guys is picked 6 overall and they go to camp and they rip it up and that's your X receiver and Jalen Reagor's your Z and, or Jalen's your slot and Fulgham's your Z, I think you're going to be a better overall team. So I have no problem with it.
Now that we have heard from Nick Sirianni a couple of times with the Spadaro interview on Eagles.com and the introductory press conference, some other hits as well, what have you taken away from those?
Yeah, I don't know, Hunter. It's been really difficult to get anything overly insightful from the press conferences. He hasn't really, I would say, really gone into great detail or length about what he wants to do. He has talked about being multiple on offense. He wants to be able to, throw whatever he can at a defense to make them not easily defendable, which is what I would hope someone would say as an offensive-minded head coach. I do like, he brought up, the Villanova's 2016 championship and how what it taught them was to be prepared for any single situation. And he wants that out of his team. He wants great preparation and great discipline. They committed a lot of penalties last year. Discipline had suddenly become a real issue for this team last year. And I think that meshes with the accountability theme that we spoke about all last year. Doug's players play for him, but does he also hold his players accountable when they screw up? They really hadn't screwed up much until the last year or two. And obviously last year it wasn't working and it was getting worse. So hopefully Nick Sirianni practice what he preaches in holding guys accountable. And I'm not just saying be a tough guy. I'm just talking about as a head coach, you have to coach your coaches. and coach your players. And if there are mistakes, Andy was the king of this. Stop practice, redo it, drill it over again. Don't just cater to certain players on the team. You got to have your practice structured so that you're getting the most out of it. So I hope that that's the case with Nick Sirianni.
That was the biggest thing I took away from his press conference anyway, was the story he told about Jay Wright and, how he wants to drill in so that when these moments come, hey, it's 4th down and 1 with 1 minute and 37 seconds left and we need a yard, and we've run that play 55 times on Friday, we're getting that first down. Like, that was, to me, through him stuttering through things and kind of having a rough moments from, here and there, which I don't think he should be judged on, by the way. That was something that I really like to hear. Like, this guy's a coach's coach. He's a coach who his brother coach, his father coach. He's got coaching in his blood. If you watch some videos of him with the Colts, he feels more comfortable in that setting than he does. By the way, I got to imagine doing a press conference on a podium with nobody in the damn auditorium is not the most natural way to go either.
I can't to this day, and I haven't really asked. Maybe I should do some research on it, but can't figure out what the purpose of having him stand at a podium and addressing the computer that has all the screen that has all the talking heads on it, trying to ask questions. Why couldn't he have done that from his office? You could certainly have put the advertising banner behind him, but why didn't you try to make him more comfortable knowing that the setting was going to be awkward, standing in an auditorium all by himself talking to a computer screen with a bunch of Brady Bunch faces on it? That to me made no sense. You should have tried to make him more comfortable, not less comfortable. I mean, let alone the fact that they left him on an island to answer all these Carson Wentz questions that he really doesn't control right now. That's a Howie Roseman question, and some of the questions are a Jeff Lurie question. Wouldn't it have been nice if the owner, after 16 minutes of talking, had taken a question himself as well? I thought it would have been.
Yeah, I mean, and you brought this up on a tweet on Friday, and we had Adam on, and he kind of brought that up too. It's the fact that, did the Eagles not tell him, hey, you're going to get asked 6 different ways about Carson Wentz? It was almost like he wasn't ready. Not that he wasn't ready. I don't think he answered them horribly. It was just like, it was almost had nothing to give you. Like, there was just, he was just, I don't want to say ill-prepared, but it was almost like he was surprised that they kept coming at him with it.
Yeah, that was surprising. And I know we shouldn't judge him on the presser. That's totally true. But at the same time, and I mentioned this in the podcast, Jeffrey Lurie went out of his way to talk about how this guy had such a great command and presence and how he was such a special communicator, a unique kind of feel for the situation and thinker. I mean, everything he basically built Nick Sirianni up to be was not what you saw in the press conference. So I think as a fan or just someone observing, you question, like, wait a minute, if you saw all that, how come that didn't translate into a press conference that you had a week to prepare for? So while I don't judge him, and I don't think it matters, or determines how many games he's going to win or lose, I do understand the reaction from a fan who was told this, that, and the other by the owner, and it almost in a way where, my God, we were blown away by all these qualities, and then the guy goes and speaks, and you see 0 of the qualities. So I can understand 24 hours of instant reaction being like, what did I just witness?
Yeah, I stand in the same boat as you, and by no means am I writing him off, but I heard a clip of him speaking in the Indianapolis locker room once while Frank Reich was sitting almost in like the players' chairs, just allowing him to be the voice, and I was a little intrigued by that. That calmed me down a bit because he did feel way more comfortable in that kind of environment. But when he was talking about his core values, do you think that it was almost too cliche-ish, as if, look, we're going to work hard, fundamentals, competition? Isn't that kind of like very cliche? And I just wonder if guys in the locker room smell that out right away, as if, really, is this guy going to sell us this?
Well, he better win. That's what it takes. Because, yes, I did feel like a lot of what he said was cliche, coach speak, which, there's a reason why cliches are cliches, because people commonly say them because they're true. I mean, you want good competition. You want accountability. You want fundamentals, right? I get it. So it was the delivery, I think, more than anything. But I will go back to this. I've heard him talk a couple of times now, and it seems like you're not going to get a whole lot of insight. And it's weird because in Indianapolis, I don't know if you guys have ever seen, their general manager, Chris Ballard, does these media sessions that go on for 45 minutes to an hour, and he's invited them in, and he's done like chalkboard sessions. I mean, the guy is more than happy to talk football with the press there. But this is in Indianapolis, too. So you got to understand, I think Sirianni is used to probably speaking to 6 or 7 reporters and maybe one or two TV people and not an army of them like you have here in Philadelphia.
Now, he did kind of hint in the press conference on Friday that, competition. He didn't want to say Wentz is the starter. He didn't even want to go as far as saying Wentz would be on the roster. He's like, I don't know that. I mean, but you have a sense that there will be a legitimate quarterback competition because a lot of people feel he was hired to make Wentz the starter. Do we get a better feeling of that there's going to be an open competition, someone's going? I mean, after the Goff trade, how do you feel this Wentz thing kind of materializes after seeing the Goff trade? And then there's some reports that the Panthers made an offer for Stafford. Washington made an offer for Stafford. So it sounds like teams are trying to be active for quarterbacks this offseason.
Yeah, I think pretty soon you'll probably see Carson Wentz's name at least linked to teams or reports. I imagine that will come out, especially when Carson has not come out and said, I'm cool with what's going on here. I'm ready to come back and approach this thing with a better mindset. The longer he goes without speaking or giving his feeling on the new coaching staff or the franchise, the more I think it opens up the type of conjecture or speculation that he still wants to be traded. So that's why I think Nick Sirianni can't really answer the question either way. But to answer your question, like if he's back and he's on the team, right, come OTAs, come training camp, I have a hard time believing that it's really going to be an open competition between him and Jalen Hurts. I would imagine that he goes into it as the leader. And if he's just terrible and completely stinks, then the team has to make a decision about if they're going forward Jalen Hurts, what they're going to do with Carson, because there's no way Carson's going to be the backup quarterback to Jalen Hurts making all that money and being disgruntled. So then they're going to probably have to move him for whatever they can get at that point. And so that makes it less of a competition and more of just a changing of the guard, I would think. I can't imagine that it's a 50-50 competition if Carson Wentz is still on the team. It doesn't work that way in the NFL. It never has.
So let me ask you this then. Would you or would the Eagles be open to moving Jalen Hurts on draft day? Or any other time of the offseason? Forget draft day. I mean, that's just a common day to make a trade of that magnitude. Tomorrow.
Yeah, I think the coaching staff would have a difficult time making that decision without getting Carson Wentz inside the facility and having the opportunity to work with him. I mean, I suppose if somebody was going to give you a really high pick, Mike, for Jalen Hurts, a first or a second, you might have to think about it. But I doubt there's going to be that kind of offer for Jalen Hurts just based on the 4 games that he played last year. So I would put that as a kind of a low probability of happening.
Do you take anything out of Sirianni saying how he is in control of the 53-man roster and I believe I have say on game day, or is that just really nitpicking at someone who was nervous and probably stumbling all over his words?
It almost seemed to suggest to me that it wasn't his number one priority as Eagles coach to have that for control of the 47 on Eagles Day. If there's wiggle room, because as most people know, sometimes you have to not activate it. Well, you don't have to. Sometimes teams decide to not make a person active for financial reasons and, in Pro Bowl escalator type reasons. So maybe I'm going to guess Nick Sirianni is smart enough to know that not every single game day decision will be his, but most of them, most of the time will be. So that's what I made of it. And of course, Howie having the 53 is not surprising because he had control of that throughout the Doug Peterson era.
How did it get to that point where the coach, how did it get so micromanaged that the coach lost the ability to coach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if control over the 53, not having it means you don't have the ability to coach. I mean, in most teams, many teams, a general manager will have that ability. It's just that on many teams, a general manager might have come more from the football sector, and so it's trusted a little bit more than, say, a guy like Howie who's come up through the salary cap sector or the business sector, if you will.
Right. It just seems that in all sports that the GM is almost gone, and it's like the president of basketball or president of baseball operations has pushed GMs out, and now they control everything. It's almost like we've heard before, like, hey, you're not going to pitch this guy more than 5 innings because the GM, that's his philosophy. And it's like, Billy Beane, that whole thing. I guess it started with the Moneyball situation where the GM told the manager, you're not playing this guy at first place. You're going to play Hatteberg. And if you don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's just such a weird thing. And, this quarterback situation, you wonder how much say the coach actually has in who he wants to play at quarterback.
Well, that's my point. I mean, if some team calls up right now and offers the Eagles a first-round pick for Carson Wentz, which I don't think is going to happen, that's not really going to be Nick Sirianni's decision. How he's going to be like, you know what, we're going to take this first-round pick, and then we'll have a conversation about the future of our quarterback position. We have Jalen Hurts. We have an extra first-round pick. We have our own 6th overall pick. So that's why I think not all of it is in Nick Sirianni's control and how he really is the person, who's going to be responsible for what happens there. And that's a great point you're making, Mike, about analytics. Really, you didn't say analytics, but that's what you were getting into with what's going on with Moneyball and Billy Beane being the first. And that's the big reason in baseball why general managers are now the guy and not managers. It's because they're all analytically driven moves. And I wanted to know from Nick Sirianni how much analytics played a role in the interview, if he embraces it, does he not embrace it? How did they use it in Indianapolis? Is he going to have to use it a lot more like the way Doug Peterson did in-game decision-making here in Philadelphia? That's why I really wanted to listen and get more questions out of Nick that weren't about Carson. And also I would have liked to have heard from Lurie and Roseman, because to me, that was a big part of it. We went into the head coaching search thinking that whoever's going to be coach of the Eagles is going to have to be on board with the way analytics plays a role in their decision making. And as of right now, we just don't know that about Nick Sirianni and his feelings on it.
Yeah, I would imagine that he is going to be invested in it, because if you aren't, then maybe you wouldn't have gotten the job. That's just me speculating, of course. But I was going to bring up Jeffrey Lurie. I knew you wanted to ask him some questions. What else would you have asked him? Because I know you were a little fired up when he was after that 16-minute monologue and you got no questions.
Yeah, well, just like you said, cliches. I felt like Jeffrey Lurie spoke in cliches. Oh, he wowed us with his presence, with his ability to communicate, and just a real leader. And I just, as a writer, you're always looking for anecdotal evidence as a reporter. Well, what did he say? How did he wow you? How do you have a 10-hour-long interview? What are all the things that you go over with? Did you guys go out for dinner? What did he order? I'm just curious. Just stuff that he may not answer, but and again, the analytics thing I really wanted to get into, seeing how much that was important, seeing how important that has been for the organization, and we got nothing on that. So that would have been nice.
Yeah, I know. Maybe because he just spoke last week and took questions. Maybe he figured, hey, I just, you're right. He took up a lot of time and a lot of babbling and and it took away from people getting the chance to ask questions to, I don't know how many people were in the queue that never got a chance to ask questions for Sirianni.
Oh, a ton. Yeah, it was ridiculous how many people. And that's the big problem I had. Jeffrey Lurie, if you're not going to take questions, don't give me a 16-minute sermon to start it off when I only got an hour, right? But for two guys. So it should have been Lurie, maybe 5 minutes, turning over to Howie for a few minutes, and then Sirianni to take it there. Instead, by the time Sirianni started his Q&A, and if you take away all the Carson Wentz questions, his Q&A was not that long.
No, I agree, and I thought they cut it short, and it took away questions that guys, and I don't know if you were in the queue waiting to ask questions. I know many that were waiting never got called on. Your thoughts on the Goff deal? They gave up 2 first-round picks just to get rid of Goff.
It's really amazing. The Rams are setting their own trend on how they feel about first-round picks compared to proven talent, right? That's a big argument all the time about draft picks over proven talent. I think they'll have 7 straight years without a first-round pick, which I think most people would tell you is unconscionable. I bet you the Rams would say that they're still in a better position because with Matthew Stafford and the defense that they had last year and the wide receivers that they have, that they're probably a pretty good bet to make the playoffs again and then maybe even go further. They're probably a decent Super Bowl contender with the move that they made. And they can probably bring out a chart that'll tell you that when you're picking in the bottom of the first round, as they commonly are, anywhere between 21 and 30, that the percentage of that player becoming a real good, a Pro Bowler, an All Pro, or even someone as good as Matthew Stafford, right, is pretty low.
Yeah.
And so if you're having a chance to get a Jalen Ramsey and a Matthew Stafford and superstar players, then you do it. But I bet you a lot of Eagles fans look at that and say, I'm not buying that, yet they'll rationalize themselves that it's okay to take a backup quarterback in the second round.
He's Geoff Mosher. This is Inside the
Come on, that was funny.
It wasn't that bad. This is Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, we do it every day at 4 o'clock. Andrew's in tomorrow. Jeff will be back on Wednesday. We'll start to look at the offseason. Of course, the draft is on the way and other moves around the NFL. We will dive into some NFL storylines throughout this offseason, and the Super Bowl is coming up on Sunday. Geoff Mosher, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. The new episode of Inside the Birds is out. Check it out, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get podcasts. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, guys, have a good one.
All right, Geoff Mosher in the house for Football at 4. It's brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back. Everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery. Go to ilovelyle.com, proud sponsor of Football at 4. When we come